You may be in danger of God stepping back, of God holding His grace back from saving you. The picture that we see before us of the pristine clear waters of the Dead Sea and the nation of Israel, the beautiful salty beaches, the tourist destination, actually holds the secret to the testimony of a day where a woman discovered that God absolutely can step back from your life and give you over to your awful sinful choices, and grace had no effect. I want to rewind the history, the clock, the timeline to 4,000 years ago at this very spot in these pristine beaches. We know from Genesis chapter 13, the landscape was like paradise, very similar to the Garden of Eden, except the cities of the plain were wicked and evil in the sight of God. Lot's wife, pitched their tent, we know from Genesis chapter 13, toward Sodom. And so we find that the first step of God stepping back is it doesn't happen in overnight or in one day. It started in Genesis 13. When Lot's wife turned to salt in Genesis 19, looking back at the city burning in destruction, that wasn't the beginning. Where was the beginning of God stepping back? It was when they decided to entertain Sodom and Gomorrah. Not to be committed, not to live there, but to indulge. So you need to understand that God stepping back doesn't happen in a day. It doesn't happen in a week. Sometimes it doesn't happen in a year. But it happens when instead of sin being a guest in our house, sin becomes the address of our life. If you've got an address with sin and you're no longer a guest, you know that you are one step closer to God stepping back and letting you rule your life. So not only is you having an address with sin, that means you didn't have one thought of lust, but you have a 12-year affair. That doesn't mean that you had a greedy thought, but it means that you have had a lifestyle of deceit and stealing and greed. And so not only do you have to have an address, but also what is the second sign that God may be stepping back from you and you missing the entire grace of God? It is the fact that Lot and his wife were comfortable. That's right. Not only did they have an address, they went from being a guest to having an address, they were comfortable in Sodom and Gomorrah. So if God is going to step back from you and take the grace of God, that is a myth. God doesn't steal grace from you. You ignore grace and reject the benefits of His blessing. And we know from Genesis chapter 19, the angels met Lot where? They met him at the city gates. He was a resident. Lot's wife was a resident, an upstanding lady of the most wickedest nation on the face of the planet. She was not just a guest, have an Airbnb, have a VRBO, but she was what? A sodomite. She was part of Gomorrah. So here we find we not only have an address as a sign that God is going to step back, but also what? When you and I become comfortable with sin, when we become a resident of Lust Boulevard, when we become a resident of Unforgiveness Alley, when we become a resident and respected member of bitterness and hatred and malice, subdivision and estates, guess what happens? We are one step closer to God stepping back and giving us what He wants. And so the question is, are you comfortable in your sin? Because if you're comfortable, if you don't feel that twinge of conviction, then guess what? It probably means that you're getting close to the line of God saying, okay, you can have what you want. So not only do we have an address as a problem, and we are comfortable with our sin, but lastly, and maybe most importantly, is what is the heat fact? Can you feel the heat. Now, when Lot and Lot's wife and his whole family were leaving the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, guess what? It was hot. It was extremely hot. We know from Scripture that as they escaped, the city was burning with fire and brimstone. And so we know that they could feel the heat of the city melting in real time on the back of their necks. And therefore, Lot was getting out of there. But Lot's wife, even though she could feel the destruction of God's wrath on the back of her neck, what is she going to do? She turns around and she does exactly what the angels told her not to do. She looks back. And when she looks back, Scripture tells us that she turns into a pillar of salt. Now, here's the important factor about this story is that God always has a plan and a desire. And when she looked back, what did she look back towards? A fire and brimstone destroying an entire nation. And she did not come out, unscathed. See, Lot's wife, where was she supposed to be? Not on top of the hill being turned into a pillar of salt, but she was supposed to be in the middle of the destruction of the entire nation. God gave her grace by allowing angels to visit her. God gave her grace by sending an angel wake-up call in the morning saying, "Get out, you stayed too long." God gave her grace by not destroying the city and allowing them to get out before it happens. And then finally, she ignores all three signs, one time too many. And so therefore, we have to understand that God's grace is always there. His salvation is always available. But if we keep saying no, if we get comfortable in our sin and have no conviction, if we choose to feel the heat of our choices and God gets us out, but then we look back and follow the same pattern of sin and choices, guess what? There will come a day where there's no hope. But the good news about Jesus is if you're watching this video, there is hope. That if we turn to Him every single time, no matter how far we've fallen, that He will absolutely listen to us and save us. Scripture says, "Whomsoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved." Therefore, if we want to experience God and Him not to step out on us, we have to make a step towards Him, to the cross. And as long as we're stepping towards Him, we will see Him save our life. And we don't have to be afraid of Him leaving, because God never leaves overnight. It's a process. And luckily, you're at the point in your life where that can be today. Thank you and have a great day.